Okay, thank you for having me. Thanks so much. And yes, I had the pleasure as well to teach here at the department for about 1.5 years, I think, before I left and went to China. So in a way, yes, I'm reporting back to Dave here what happened in between and what I've done in the meantime. My background is I studied industrial design in Germany, and I've spent most of my career in the automotive business, starting in Germany as well, coming over to the States here, working for suppliers in the automotive industry and working as well for the OEMs. So here in the States, for example, working for Mitsubishi Motors. And then went over to China to start a new venture, which was also more educational venture, but then eventually took over that supplies at design companies studio and rebuild it from the ground up. So I did a turnaround. So anyway, I'm not a business guy, I'm a designer, but I had to do a lot of business as well. So China. Of course, a very large country, and what you can see that the majority is actually on the right side. On the left side, there's a lot of big mountains and hills, and what we are focusing most of my time was done in Shanghai, which is really a coastal city. It's a port city, so it's a very, very open city to the world, where China was kind of had probably the first foreigners really coming into the Shanghai side to kind of influence. So there's a lot of business going on into this city. So for me, it's kind of an interesting part, and for the Chinese as well. It's like this journey between tradition, yeah, this is from a traditional Chinese gate to some type of a temple complex to the modern luxury in China. What you see, there's a certain color scheme going on. We are joking sometimes in our WeChat group, so anybody who doesn't know WeChat, I just communicated on WeChat to my girlfriend down there. So we kind of have pink, so they're like very, very broad, very strong colors there. So what are we doing? First, some quick facts, which might be a little bit interesting. Then about building the business, how kind of the basic stuff, how we approached it, so I'll go into that a little bit. Then I have some examples of projects that we've done. Interesting is you have local manufacturers, so Chinese manufacturers that are not so well known yet here, but that are coming as well to the States. You have joint ventures. Joint ventures is a required system for Western companies that need to work together with a local manufacturer and then Western manufacturers. So we've done a lot of design as well for Western manufacturers with the view mostly on China, of course, and then a little bit about the life and kind of the things. So if you have any questions, let me know, jump in, raise your arms, whatever. You can interrupt me, and because I think it's nice as well to have kind of a conversation. So if you don't understand something or something, don't feel shy and let me know. Okay, so China, of course, it's building. It has gigantic buildings, it has humongous building structures. It builds bridges, it builds cities from the ground up in the shortest time. So to me, the roads, of course, are very important because it symbolizes a little bit the road where China is going and where I as well was joining. China is a country that is changing very fast, and of course I am a foreigner with a view onto China. I'm not Chinese. I don't know, is any Chinese here? There? Yes? Okay, good. Hi. So when I came to China about 6 years ago, 7 years, no, it's probably 7 years ago now, I was still on the road for like who gets rich the fastest, yeah, and it was a very materialistic approach, and that has changed since then, yeah. So a lot of the larger cities, they've finished their big building projects. They are very modern now. So I show some images there. The whole infrastructure is less than 10 years old probably. So it's a very, very modern place where unfortunately sometimes the old things had to go to let room for the new things. But what's interesting is by 2025, they're predicting that there will be 250 million families in the middle class. 250 million families in the middle class. So that means if you have a family, and now there are 2 children again, there's a grandmother, the grandpa, and so on and so forth. So you have, let's say, average 4 people. You have 1 billion people in the middle class. So I don't know of any country, maybe India is slowly building up their middle class, getting richer, but you have to kind of see, and you see it virtually there, how society is changing, how the society overall is getting much, much richer. It's a society that has built over the last years a tremendous amount of wealth. There will be 75 million college graduates. And what's interesting about that, in the past it was like, in the past it was about being a doctor or an engineer or something like that. A lot of the young students there, they wanted to become creatives. It's a very focus on creativity now for design, art, and so on and so forth, because that society which I come to is changing now. You have 1 billion city dwellers. The urbanization is crazy. Yeah? So a lot of people from the countryside moving into the big cities. They are 50% of household income by women. So women as well are a very strong force in China. Yeah, they're probably the strongest force actually in that country. A lot of the large companies that are run in China and that are successful are run by women. So women have the ability in China specifically, I don't know why, to run. Actually, the company is also much more profitable compared to the men. Yeah, so it's very interesting. You see as well women doing jobs that you would never see doing here. So on the construction sites, women are as men on the construction site, doing the heavy lifting, putting the stones down and doing all the same stuff. So it's a bit more of an equal society. Yeah, here, if you go to a construction site, have you ever seen a woman working on a construction site here? No, hardly. I've never seen it here, but there you see it all the time. Yeah, so it's very normal. So it's very different. So women have a much bigger buying power as well. So 75% of household spending is done by women. Yeah, so I think that's a tremendous achievement there as well. Like in our company as well, at some point we were 50-50 women and men. Yeah, so I was very happy to have achieved that, to have a team that is very, very equal there. Value shifts. So I mentioned that in the beginning, that when I got there was like lots about like how do I get rich and not get caught. Yeah? Now it's about experience. So it's how do I experience something? Like how do I get out of the rat race? How do I find out more in life? There was this yearning for that for quite some time. There's a lot of outward looking, of course, there. So travel is going on quite a bit. The home now became much more important. So that means a huge consumer shift is happening there of what's important to buy. Food and beverages, so like on the top I have that, but so instant noodles, yeah? Instant noodles, which were kind of a commodity. Everybody ate instant noodles because you wanted to make it as cheap as possible because you needed to save up money to buy a Mercedes. So now, okay, I don't buy the Mercedes, I buy maybe a Great Wall or Haval, or I buy a Geely, but I'd like to have some good food, and I like to go and get some cool couches and change my neon light to actually some nice light. So the values of your home, of your environment, that all shifted in that time. You have a very health conscious country, of course. I mean, food, super important. what do you eat, when, at which season, how does it affect your health, and so on and so forth. All those things that are very important, but also now sports. I mean, you see people doing sports all the time, older people, which is fun, old women and men like that are retired, yeah, always in the evening in the parks, playing the music, doing the dancing, yeah, the young Chinese, yeah, like they think it's kind of funny when their grandma is doing that, but it's great. I mean, like they're doing sport. You've never seen that here. Yeah, it's really about health, but it's also on the young people. So there's a lot of addition on gyms. They have gyms everywhere. What's it called? Some of the other sports are very, very important, like that helping you to grow as a person. Yeah? So smoking bans comes in. Yeah? When I came in, everybody was smoking in the restaurants. Now it's not anymore, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean? I kind of mentioned as well, all those shifts is like, okay, it doesn't need to be the Gucci bag, it doesn't need to be the Porsche, it doesn't need to be the Rolex anymore. So maybe I can cut down on my spending on there. I can like maybe get a Xiaomi, maybe get some Chinese products. Of course, more and more Chinese companies are now coming in, having a quality product that is accepted by the population, and like, okay, we can buy that now because now we want to spend money on traveling. Now we want to spend money on educating ourselves. We want to spend money now on the yoga classes. Yeah, yoga is a huge thing in China now. So that all kind of yes, kind of like makes this whole country so interesting for me that literally in front of your eyes you not see only a city transform, you see the values transform of people. Yeah, it's like it's a very fascinating route. But of course, it's not always a straight road, but a windy road.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, like, when these value shifts started.
I don't know. They started probably when they started to think about to change their economy, when they were allowing to have privatization on their businesses, and when Chinese started to move. So the values shifted throughout. But in the last 6 years, that's what I was able to witness. It changed from that dramatically, which is crazy. I would have never expected to see something like that. Yeah, it's visible. It's how do I explain it? So, for example, there's like in Shanghai, it's a large expat community. So the expats are the foreigners that are coming in, and there are certain restaurants also catering to that group of people, which had usually a higher income bracket. Yeah, because in order to come into China, to be voted in as a foreigner, as an expert, yeah, you're normally a senior kind of guy who understands like how to do certain things that are desired there. So they bring you in, you have a good salary, so you can go to the good restaurants. There was no Chinese really going to those restaurants. Now it's like mostly Chinese in those restaurants because they go now to the French restaurants, to the Italian restaurants, and so on and so forth, because I've been traveling. They're kind of like bringing as well different attitudes back. Yeah? They're normally very particular about food. Yeah? That's why for Chinese sometimes very hard to live abroad because there's no good Chinese food anywhere else. Yeah? So it's tough to get good Chinese food anywhere outside of China. So that's a tough part. Yes, but yeah, it's part of what you kind of see and what people talk about, what they do. Yeah, traveling is a huge thing now. So that's a picture as well I took actually. So all of the pictures I took, so none of the pictures are any pictures that are pulled off the internet here. This is when I went into the Sichuan mountain, so I show some images later. Beautiful landscape, one of the best road trips I've ever took. Amazing road trip. But now let's go and talk about the business that we built there together, and I was able to lead. When I took it over as a GM, the business from this fairly small design company, which is a British design company, privately held by the owner, I was asked to take over as a general manager, which I've done. So the thought was, okay, what do we do now? Because what they've been used to and what was the past is to get projects in China, bring in foreign expertise that are working on those projects on site, wherever that manufacturer is, and then they kind of disperse the team again. Those foreigners go back wherever they might be going to other projects or not, but there was never really its own team there. So I said, like, no, we need to have a team in China in order to do actual projects. So I've hired some young, super talented designer from Tongji University, one of the large universities in Shanghai, and we kind of started to work on our first project. So an internal project, which I'm showing here, which is the Imperial Concubine, we call her, that needed to be there for a training purpose. So I have had a young male designer, a young female designer that were going into this now, working with the alias modelers then, and working on a very Chinese project. But at that time, a lot of the other companies were doing the dragons and it needed to be red or whatever. So we kind of try to like see, okay, how do you actually transcend some of those themes in a more mature way, so to speak. Yeah? So we kind of took a lot of images, lots of thoughts. We had some clothes of kind of the concubine. We've had, you see the draping clothes that then influenced the interior quite a bit. We looked at as well the bow, the Chinese bow, that influenced then the body side quite a bit with some of those sharp lines. And that kind of was a bit more removed translation of kind of a Chinese theme, which was not so in your face obvious, but had clearly certain parts. You here see kind of this draping clothes on the front seat. So this car was very, very interesting because we went with the designers through several iterations in Alias. So it's the CAS modeling program that we use in the automotive industry. To figure out the proportions, yeah, that's what the designer needed to understand, the proportions, the surfaces, and so on and so forth. So again, these are all sketches from a guy right off the university there. Some final sketches. So this model then was done as an alias model, here's an alias model, and milled eventually as well as a hard model without any further changes or something that you normally do in a physical model. So this is kind of the exterior and the interior, which we then were able to use for the marketing material, because when I took it over, I couldn't really show anything new. I couldn't really use what has been done over in Europe and everywhere else. So I wanted to have something that actually our designers in our Shanghai team did, and that I wanted to show that. So I think that design, honestly, it's now 6, 7 years old. It's still fresh. It still has a lot of relevance. When you see what kind of comes out now in the industry, I feel that we've done a very relevant, very, very advanced design actually with those young talents. That led us to our first studio. So just a little bit of a view here into the first studio that we were able to set up. Important for us is always to have a studio that is very secure. So where you have an entrance where people can come in, you have a conference room, another conference room, and then you have another door that is securing the rest of the area. Here's the sales, and here you kind of have the big studio. So this studio area here, the red one, it's kind of the view that you have in there for the studio area which our designers are in, and this is kind of the front area of that. What I love there as well is the great teamwork. We right away implemented really, really great teamwork, that we all worked together. That sometimes in some companies I've experienced that each designer wanted to do his design and wanted to have his name on the car or something like that later. And that had the more priority than getting as a whole a great work out, the best work possible. So here I felt that we were very strong because we were able to bond the team fairly quickly together, that the team wanted to work together. We built an international team. We had foreigners together with a young Chinese team, and we kind of creatively really learned from each other, from the different approaches. And that was very important. That was actually it's something that I felt we were able to implement from the learnings before, where my company that I worked for that time put in foreigners for projects in certain OEMs. Those foreigners did not culturally understood what they were dealing with and who they were dealing with. So they generated a lot of problems very quickly, culturally, and of course professionally and so on and so forth. So bringing in a Chinese team that was able to guide as well how to deal with certain situations with customers was very, very, very important in order to have a successful project. What do we do? Of course, if you're building a company, you have to build up your team, but you have to, in order to build up your team, you have to as well kind of put in the services. So what do you actually do? Yeah. Hey. So we kind of defined kind of a bunch of services that we believe that we needed. What are the competences for those services? So that's kind of part of our marketing approach, of course, when we kind of talk to a potential client in order to tell them, okay, we can do turnkey design projects, but we can also just do the color and trim for you. Yeah. So we've done for Audi, for example, advanced color and trim projects there. Just to show them next generation EV type color, what could happen, what do we think will go. Or we did project management, kind of where we've set up a whole studio for a joint venture company to pretend there's a design studio there. I talk about it later, which is very funny as well. So we can do all kinds of things. So of course we kind of communicated that. That has to have the base of a good company structure. So on the top, that was me, yes, the general manager, and then you have a program structure and an operations structure. Yeah? So I think that it's a should be a fairly normal structure kind of for a service company like us. Plus, of course, you have more the consultant side or the business development side than here. So business development side is a little bit on the side. Operation structure, so we've built an administration, the finance and HR, so that there's a clear way of how to run the company, because we hired, of course, in the creative side, the digital creation, engineering, user experience, and the physical creation. We kind of hired a team of people there to work. So within that, we have designers, senior designers, exterior, interior, color and trim, the digital creation, the sculpting, surfacing, visualization. So those different functions basically that you have to have in a design organization. To realize a project, and those projects some can go fairly complex at some point. We work with project plans very quickly. So I love project plans, so I do those project plans then in order to figure out how you do a project. So when do you do certain things? What are your milestones? This is part for us, which is very important for the offer that we give to a client. So when we as a service company been asked, okay, can you design for us an exterior or an interior or whatever? And so it's like, okay, what's my time frame? Yeah, because then your time frame sets up like how quickly you have to develop something, potentially how many people you have to put in. So they're saying like, okay, this is what we want at the end. That's the result. This is the time frame. So you give us a cost. So we're kind of looking into with this structure, what do we need to do? When does certain things need to be finished in order to kind of get to the next step? Yeah. So sometimes you see funny lines and so on and so forth. So I'm using a program that actually runs on a Mac and not MS Project, which is the preferred for mostly, but it's a very gray project. So I don't gray app that I don't like so much. So here, colorfully kind of visualize it, yeah, because of course coming from a designer, but there's a lot of points, and this is actually just a small part of a long project plan. So I'll show you later. We had to develop 3 cars, exterior and interior, in a matter of 10 months. Yeah, there was show cars that had to go to a show car level in a 10 months period, which is pretty fast for the automotive. To control that as well, you have to have a good project manager. I had a great project manager who was running those projects, Gilles, And then you have to track. You have to track all the changes, all the issues, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So if it gets red, it's not a good thing. If it gets green, you're happy. So a very, very complex structure, because with those projects it's one big or a couple of big things, but they are broken down in lots and lots and lots of little different tasks, and somebody needs to have the overview that you don't forget it if you have to have a result. So this project as well in particular, which I took it went over basically the exterior was done in China, the design control was in China, and then our colleagues in Germany, they helped us to do the digital modeling and the design execution as well. But we had to go over to Germany a couple of times to control what they were doing. Yeah? So that's very interesting. Often you kind of hear it's like the control comes from the Western side maybe, but here we had often projects where the control was done in China and we needed to control the Western side. Part of my job as well, I needed to do a lot of Excel lists, like planning, yeah? So like crazy Excel lists per month, what I need to spend, and it's so small that you don't see it, which is good. Yeah, so how many people do I need? How many projects I do need? So I had to report to my boss, okay, this year I will make this amount, this year I will make that amount, because my feet were put to the fire all the time by the finance guy who wanted to close us all the time, that we were needing to make more money, and we needed to make at all money. Yeah? So graphs, thoughts, who do we have at customer, who is the next customer, and so on and so forth. So it gets pretty complex from its business side. I don't want to bore you too much because we're on the designer side, and I think this is the last slide of that. But in order to do the creative side, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be happening in order to run the team and in order to run those projects. And for me, that was always a very important part to let the creative guys focus on their work, so that all of the project managed side, the money side, and so is kind of hold on the one side and be managed and that it's okay, so that the guys on the creative side can do their work. With that, we moved. We had to move, unfortunately. That's how it is sometimes as well. We had a great studio, but unfortunately, the company that we were renting from, Photon, they wanted to use the space, so they threw us and all the other renters out and said like, okay, you gotta go, because we want to use the space now for ourselves, because we are doing some changes in our organization. So we had the chance to get a new studio. That was actually a time when I was about to leave China already. So I showed you already a couple of the projects that I've done there, doing about a 4.5 year project. We will have some more. But so that was a fantastic new studio that I was able to set up, which was much bigger than the older one, because I predicted, of course, that we will grow more. So again, big entrance, conference rooms, nice kitchen, the admin side, and the studio space with a space where we could put as well cars inside. So that was the vision. We never got to that point, unfortunately, but kind of a studio side. Here you see a view into that studio. There's kind of the admin side. So very stylish. I mean, of course, I was paying quite a bit of attention on the whole design. I mean, when you just think about this is a concrete wall. Yeah, so they poured a concrete wall that had wood slabs on top in order to get this really rough, nice wooden kind of grain on it. And I wanted to have that in contrast to the warmth of the wood. So we kind of played with the contrast of warm and cold in that space. And of course, I wanted to have a very solid, very representative space there. Here again, see a little bit into that studio now when it was like up and running with the designers. Here you see actually that's Wang Shu. So Wang Shu is kind of was the leading senior designer there. He was a very, very strong figure actually in our studio, guiding the other designers and the modeler. So here you see them discussing one of the clay models of one of the projects. So many projects that we've done. So, any questions about that yet? Okay, I don't know how much time I have. I'm running through here. So, then I mentioned before that I divided up the projects a little bit in the Chinese brands, the joint venture brands, and the Western brands. So we are going through that right now. First project, interesting. Was very, very glad, very happy that we were allowed to do an interior project for Chery Motors. Maybe Chery Motors, not so known, is one of the private. Nothing is really private when you're big in China, so government is behind it. So they're kind of actually a company that was at some point fairly strong in China, is selling overseas already, and so on and so forth. So we were allowed for that Tiggo 3, which is the best seller at that time, to do an interior. So this is one of the kind of final sketches, key sketches. Thought was here for that sketch to have a large screen. So what Mercedes is showing now as well in their newest product. So same ideas we had there already as well. But of course we had to kind of deal with a little bit more reality then. So when they needed to still use a more traditional gauge because there was a lot of carryover parts underneath. And we still were fighting to keep the original design intent. So what happens in China often when you work with the local brands is that they have a platform, wherever they got this platform from, or they have a car that they have already in production, and you need to put a top hat. What you call it, like you take the old hat and you put a new hat basically on it. So everything underneath kind of stays the same. That's what we've done with the interior. So the interior is like a top hat, yeah? So the main structure needs to stay intact while you try to have the largest impact with a new fresh design for this. So that's what we've done. And of course we really looked into how do we bring in as well the quality. So we had a great team as well working on the interior. We had a lot of fights with the engineering, which was very, very funny. No, it was not funny at some points because they were basically getting at each other. So we had at one point almost a fight between our guys and the client's engineering team in the studio. But there was a good thing. It was not done between the Western and the Chinese. It was done between Chinese. Yeah? So that's like, they were okay to do that, to argue as hard as possible about that project. And at the night, they went out for a drink. Yeah? So that's kind of the genius part. And I think that's what made this interior very, very strong. So it got very good rating in perceived quality from the customers. One of the, in that sense, one of the best interiors they've had, because our designers and our studio engineers were so strong and pushed with their engineers to make that happen. We had the challenges that their engineering team changed a couple of times. I think we had 2 or 3 different engineering teams to deal with. So if you're all familiar, Chinese New Year is about in February. What do you do after Chinese New Year? Anybody worked already, China? No? You leave the company because you got your bonus. So the engineering team literally left after Chinese New Year because they got their bonus, so they were able to go to a new company. Yeah? So people tend to wait to switch their companies after Chinese New Year, after they got the bonus. So then you started to deal with a new team. Our team luckily stayed for the most part. But fluctuation, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is frequent. So you're lucky if the people stay 2 or 3 years with you and then they move on again because they probably earn some more money somewhere else because somebody else needs urgently designers. I mean, creative guys, they are like, I mean, if you are creative, if you can hold a pencil, you get a job basically. Yeah? So it's a very urgent need. But of course now the quality is very, very high in China. Here, this interior bug is very interesting. This is what you see here as actually clay. Clay we are using in automotive to sculpt the things. And this is a painted bug with a very high quality, some parts and pieces inside. And what he has on is an Oculus. Boom. So our company already was pretty advanced with the virtual reality. So we used here in this case a virtual reality glasses as well, that the person was sitting inside that interior, putting on the glasses, seeing the same interior, but was able to change out the colors, and we were able to show the other options of the car. So you had one static model, and then with the virtual you had a dynamic model that the person was able to look at the different color schemes. First time that we kind of used it out, I think it was fairly early at that time. The glasses were not super fine yet, but I think it was a very, very good exercise, and we used virtual reality quite a bit. Then what you see, okay, here, that's the clay model, that's the painted. This is the same model, and this is then the final outcome. That's the production vehicle. So one of the projects that actually got finished. Another interesting project that we got into was the HMI. So we started an HMI team to do clusters, mainly on the cluster side, and we kind of worked together with our animation guy, who've done several animation movies for clients to do storytelling, and he was a great help on us to visualize as well the HMI side, the graphics. So our young designers worked together with the guys in Munich, again with our German team that we've had that time in Munich as well, and pulled together quite a bit of very creative new designs. And then we had in China a lead designer that was able to work with the engineering of the large suppliers then to implement it into production, actually 1 or 2 projects. Another project which is for Photon. Photon is a large company in Beijing, part of the bike group. That's state-owned company, hardcore. We've been tasked to do a top hat, basically, to a redesign of a kind of a small van. What was interesting about that project, another design company has done the original design for that, which was a van that had a rear wheel. So you call them bread vans. It's a bread van. Rear-wheel drive, and now they wanted to do a front-wheel drive version, but using kind of the same design or same parts as much as possible. But for the front-wheel drive version, of course, the car had to go wider, because you had the motor in the front, you had the wheels that need to be driven, so they had to have a wider track. So the car was widened, so they utilized basically the body side. This body side, the doors from that car, but everything else had to change. Yeah? So it was a very interesting project. We tried to push them a little bit. We gave them different design options and so on and so forth. And what happens sometimes, what you read here as well in the Western world, they like as well to look at other products and emulate them, let's say. So in our case, we kind of had a cool design, and then the boss of that company came in, and he had just bought a Honda Odyssey, and he's like, I really like the Honda Odyssey, and the front end I want to have on my car now. So we kind of had to struggle with that, and like trying to get him a little bit away from that it's maybe not a good idea, and so on and so forth. So, however, so the project went through. At least this was a design stage as well. We had brought in a Western clay modeler there, and that was kind of the final product. Has a big lion on it. I think they kind of invented a new name for it, the Grandeur. Oh yeah, it was called the Grandeur, by the way, which is very funny, because it's not a grand car, but sometimes the names have to be grand. That's actually, yes, it's a very interesting thing. If I'm talking about names for a second here, if you have the right name as a company, you can sell really well. If you don't have a good name in China, you might not really sell well. That came to very, very clear at some point. I got into a workshop with a company that does motor oils or something like that. And this company did this big workshop to figure out how to increase sales in China. And at some point I asked, like, okay, what's actually your Chinese name? And you're like, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, so Western are completely ignorant. And then the Chinese like, nothing, I don't know. And then like we discussed further, and at some point suddenly someone is like, yeah, okay, it's called dandelion. I was like, okay, that's your problem. Boom, you call dandelion. Who buys like an oil product that calls dandelion or whatever it was called? Yeah, some funny flower. So it's like doesn't make sense. Yeah, there. So a BMW, for example, is precious horse. Yeah, Bauma. Yeah, it's a precious horse. VW, which is the largest manufacturer probably in China in that sense, it's the people's car. Yeah, I mean, like that completely makes sense in China. So certain things completely make sense. So if you are understanding that you have to really work with the cultural heritage, with the culture there, then you can be successful. If you work against it, you will never be successful if you're ignorant to that. Interior sketches, so I don't know. I think they are mostly for that vehicle as well that I showed earlier. Again, I think some of the final sketch, the clay model, and I showed you earlier how we went in. These projects are actually quite interesting. So because it's a state-owned company, I showed you earlier a project plan. Yeah, so that you trying to squeeze your project in and you work it. With a state-owned company, forget about project plans. It kind of goes the way it goes. So it's a project that they say, oh, this takes 3 months and we want to have it finished. That project took probably 9 months because they couldn't make the decision, and then they wanted us to come sometimes later, and they needed to have a Westerner come to the company to present it, and yada, yada, yada. So we had to learn as well that, okay, maybe this is a project plan in the principle, but we have to do with different companies different ways. So with this company, we really learned on the multiple projects we had with them, okay, we need to get the designers on it. The designers work for a week or 2 weeks on it, and then we stop working. And then whenever they want to see it, then we send over the sketches. Because maybe a month later, then we get a reaction, and then we start working on that again for a week, yeah? So that we are not using up this budget in the first 3 months, which we've done with the project for them, but that we use up this budget actually in a half a year, yeah, because that's what the project will take. But that means we have to have multiple steps there. Another interesting project, because we didn't do only automotive, we've done as well some buses, and here in this case we've worked on the cabin, on the interior for what is it, diesel, I think, oh no, it's an electric locomotive for CNR, which is now the largest train manufacturer in the world. So this was a very interesting project because, of course, we needed to do the design. We've done as well the alias work for that, and then it was implemented into two trains or something like that. So very, very fun kind of project. Actually, these sketches were done by a French designer, very good French interior designer. Now, from Chinese brands to the joint venture brands. What is joint venture brands? In China, Western or any foreign manufacturers were required to share their knowledge with a Chinese OEM. So the Chinese OEM often became the manufacturer, while the Western OEM then came in with their vehicle knowledge that needed to be produced there. So they developed all the cars, and the Chinese companies developed it, and they did often the sales. So pretty much all of them, if it's Ford, GM, VW, and so on and so forth, they're all set up in that way. So here we've done a fantastic project that I've mentioned earlier. There was a time when in China the government mandated those joint ventures to do indigenous vehicles, an indigenous brand. Some companies successfully did that. I think GM with Baojun did that pretty successful. There's from Nissan a indigenous brand that was created that was also very successful. Why did the Chinese government do that? They figured out that the foreign brands cheated them the whole time. Because China, of course, wanted to get the knowledge from the Western brands how they develop and produce cars. The knowledge they only got was the production of the cars. So they never understood how the cars are developed. That's what we as a service company had to suffer under, because there was, of course, crazy expectations from Chinese OEMs how the design process runs. And we always wondered, like normally design process runs here for 2 or 3 years. In China, design process is a half a year or 3 months or whatever sometimes, yeah? Because of course they have no understanding really, because their partners never showed them that, because they kept that very, very secret. So in order to force the partners now to do that, they invented the JV brands, the indigenous brands, where the development needed to officially happen in China. And of course, they were circumventing quite a bit also the Western or the foreign companies. They gave then those brands, indigenous brands, old product, and those old product needed to be redesigned. So in a way that happened here as well. But we came in and said like, okay, this brand needs to be introduced, and we wanted to show 3 show cars. So you got to do 3 show cars for us in a matter of 10 months, exterior, interior. I mean, that's a huge, huge job when you don't have anything. You have a white sheet of paper, basically. They had 1 car that they showed us where we kind of needed to take some design language from, but then really develop it further with our team. What happened as well doing that project, that's why this brand was never introduced into the market, that China thought, fuck it. We will leapfrog all of you guys because we will go into the electric vehicles. So we do now the Faraday Futures and the Lucids and the Bytons and the Neos and all of those other new brands that will school all of you guys because we are already technology-wise way more advanced with that. And China is now has implemented a very, very strong rule on electric vehicles. So in China now, I don't know how many electric vehicles are sold, but the electric vehicles, no country is buying more electric vehicles in China because of the government mandate. So there's a lot of money poured into that. So they are now just leapfrogging or wanting to leapfrog the industry. Of course, now all the Western or the other manufacturers need to jump on because they're also required to do that. So the big company, which is getting hurt by that as well as VW, of course, because if you need to, I think 10% or 15% of your production needs to be electric. So if you sell in China 600,000 cars like VW probably per month or something like that, that's a huge amount of electric cars you have to churn out suddenly. If you're a small manufacturer, you can do it easily. But for a large manufacturer like that, it's very, very difficult. Interesting, I mentioned VW. Maybe VW nobody knows in the States because they're not really relevant here. In China, they're hugely relevant. They're the biggest guy there. So with this joint venture, they were very keen into getting the imagery as well. So what do we base it on? And that's what I really, really enjoyed, that we were allowed to look at their brand DNA. How do we build the brand DNA? So a very sophisticated project from an intellectual point of view, where we try to figure out for the 3 different cars, what is the umbrella for the 3 different cars, but what differentiates those different cars. So how can it be one brand, but how can each car express slightly different the right attitude for the potential customer that was envisioned for that. So we've done a lot of projects, we've done a lot of imagery to visualize that. That was also looked at like those spider graphics, yeah, where we kind of overlaid the 3 different cars. So what do they embody? Where is each of those cars a little bit strong? Is it more? They all needed to be kind of sharp, fluid, not so much. One needed to be, I mean, spacious. It was like the minivan, yeah. Then the SUV, a little bit less spacious, and the sedan, of course, less, but more elegant, and so on and so forth. So that each of those cars needed to have a certain type of that characteristic, and that needed to be expressed as well into the drawing. So sometimes in China, we kind of joked about it that if the leader likes red, so he chooses the red car sketches. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the design is, but it's red, so he likes it, he takes it. So here it was like really like looking at like the logic behind the design. So we enjoyed it quite a bit. Sometimes it's a little bullshit, yeah, when you go a little bit too much, but at least it's a process that you kind of have to have an explanation for your design, for your spaciousness. Where does it come from? Yeah, the solid and stable. So it's always kind of a big part is dachi. Yeah? Dachi means kind of a certain grandness, strength in it, but it's also kind of settled in itself. Yeah? It's not an aggressive thing. So China doesn't like aggressive kind of cars. They try dachi kind of cars. So it's always a topic for years now with them. Then again, simplifying as well, showing with the very strong, very unique images, very simply the different attitudes. Yeah, the simple, exquisite, the modern. We had developed Rui as well, kind of a Chinese play on Chinese characters. Rui. There were three different meanings to the word Rui, which I now forget, but I think it's part of this whole system. But that's again came out of the ideas of our young Chinese designers. Out of that, we kind of developed the sketches. So here you start to see the sedan, the minivan kind of sketches are, and that's kind of the SUV sketches here. And of course, through the process, things developed. You see some of the interior sketches. Again, we kind of thought for the interior, can we carry over certain parts from one car to the next? Because the timing was so short, so how do we pull it off in such a short time to do all of that? So what we ended up at the end was showing the exteriors, and that was kind of the final presentation time. Big imagery in the back. We had the sedan, which was in clay. I think the SUV was still in clay as well. The SUV, what's called the MPV, was just in a foam model, just similar to the car that we've had first milled out in a foam model. So what we've done there, we went in and we, from the first set of rough data, mill a foam model. And then we undercut the foam model and put the clay on top in order to work it a little bit further. So that's what you kind of see here. And then the clay model, which is this and this, they get die-knocked. I think in this case they got die-knocked. So that's a foil you put around the car, which is just silver in order to show the surfaces and the proportions, of course. Here you see just, again, some views on the clay for the SUV. And you see in the background there the sedan. Important, and that's where we used a lot of VR in the development. We had then 3 designers taking care of the 3 different exteriors. So each designer does their own design. And what I found then very quickly is that each designer expressed the design in their feeling. And when we put it in 3D and into VR, very quickly you were able to put the glasses on and you kind of look around, you see how different those characters are. And that gave us the chance to really bring the language together so that those 3 cars are not looking like they're done by 3 designers, but they are done for one brand. So that was a very, very important part. And what you see here, this is kind of a brand that should be slid in between the Chinese local branded cars, that the Chinese manufacturer did, and the Photon manufacturer, which was an American company, large American company, that was their joint venture partner. So these cars, they needed to be kind of slid in the middle between those. And that's of course, that's kind of the drawings, and that's the renderings of the 3D. And part of the final presentation, of course, was like the renderings for exterior and renderings for the interior of the SUV, the sedan, and the MPV. So unfortunately, this project did not make it to the auto show, but we came as a company that was good with our client there to a very good conclusion of finalizing the design from our side so that they were able to close it. Another crazy project. Okay, so joint ventures, Indigenous Vehicle, same kind of deal, same kind of thought here at that time, that this manufacturer here with their joint venture needed to show the capability, and I told you that before, to design and develop the indigenous vehicles in China. Of course, they didn't do that. We bid it for that at some point, but then their design studio in Europe said, no, we need to take it over in Europe, the design, because we have to take care of it, blah, 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 blah. So the design was actually done in England. But still, they needed to show to the Chinese government, yes, we do all the development here. So then they came back to us and said like, okay, we need a design studio. Build us a design studio. We're like, okay, we build a design studio. So, okay, what do? We get the design, we milled the model, we painted the model, we got all the design sketches, we built the design story. I went to suppliers to get leather samples, color samples. We put in a 3D projector inside and so on and so forth. So this was a 3D printer inside. They had copy machines, they had the desks, they had everything. And that was for basically one government show for a half an hour or maybe 10 minutes. Some government leader came in. What it is, it's a big film stage, yeah? Which was a very nice project for us. Because it was very fun to kind of run that. But that was kind of one of those odd, strange projects you sometimes might do in order to satisfy certain needs, which for us is kind of a little strange. But it was very important in order to get the license to produce cars in China. If they wouldn't have showed it, they wouldn't have gotten the license to produce cars in China. So they just put in billions into their factory that they just built, a complete new factory. So this is peanuts, doesn't matter. Western brands. Okay, so the third category, the Western brands. Shall I take a break? No? Okay, Western brands. We've been asked by a German luxury manufacturer to help them to work with the Tongji University. They had the Tongji University lab there. And the task for the students was originally to propose with their teams new features for their next luxury top-of-the-line vehicle. What was interesting about it that not only the designers were asked, but engineering was asked, marketing was asked. So they had cross-functional teams. So I think that's a very, very important part now. We often in universities speak about teamwork. A cross-functional team, I think that's the way to go. I talked as well to another university here in California that is doing now cross-functional projects. You should and you can do that now more and more. And so we've done that there as well in China, very advanced. And after the students, so I was helping the students, I was basically leading the class there at Tongji University. Every week I went there. And then we took that and presented it to the manufacturer in Germany via video conference. And they decided, okay, this team is the winning team or whatever. So then the doors closed and we got involved of now taking all those suggestions and actually make a design out of it to present all those features, those ideas. And so now you're seeing sketches from our designers here to show that. Out of that, then we developed a 3D model, of course, that we then used for a extensive PowerPoint to do a storytelling. So storytelling actually was, we've done several projects about storytelling. How do we explain a product? In this case, we've done it quite a bit. That in this interior, there's a lot of features. From just pulling out the little desk, having the screen there. How do you interact with the screen? Moving the seat, moving the front seat away, lighting, cleaning the air. How do you interact with it? And again, I mentioned earlier, women are very important. Of course, we used a female executive for this case to run through that day to use and utilize this vehicle. So I don't want to get into too many details here, but that eventually as well was done as a interior bug that visualized those features besides the PowerPoint, the 3D data, and all of that stuff that we delivered with that hopefully inspired eventually future products. Another project that was for a truck manufacturer as well in Germany, where our team out of Munich asked us in China to support the design for Europe. And so what I did always with the design team here, I don't really have the slides showing that, but we thought about like, okay, what are the themes for each potential design execution? So we had living room, we had toolbox, we had certain keywords, and then the designers were able to utilize those keywords, those things, in order to represent kind of that type of feeling in the sketches. So for me, it's always very important that the designer has the ability to visualize a concept. And we've done that here very strongly with this project. It was very, very successful, where our design very much influenced then the production truck actually from that manufacturer. So maybe at some point I have to look at the images of their trucks, how much it was influenced then. But it's kind of funny, our young design team in China influenced eventually the interior for a large, very, very old truck manufacturer in Germany. Another fun project was the Koenigsegg. I don't show you the video. So we were asked to support Koenigsegg. It's the Swedish hypercar company, to do the visualizations for the Regera, which was introduced at the Geneva Auto Show. That included those images and a short video as well showing the car. What's cool about this car is that Mr. Koenigsegg really doesn't like hybrids or anything, but then he thought, oh, maybe it could be useful. So I think this car is a plug-in hybrid and it has only one gear. So I think he uses the electric motor to accelerate the car from 0 up to 60, and then I think the engine comes in and powers then the rest until it goes 300 or something like that. So here that guy's a little bit nuts. So this is a complete nuts hypercar. It was very, very fun for us to visualize it. But what's interesting as well, we've done this project in the shortest amount of time. So the video was done in about 2.5 weeks. Very, very short, with like crazy changes just before we pushed the render button in order to have it even done for the Geneva Motor Show. So it was very, very cool because it introduced our renderings, our images, and movie introduced that hypercar. BMW, client of ours as well, that we worked a lot. We worked with BMW that we gave them a lot of our talent. So one of my super young alias guys that I hired in China, he was so good, we even had to bring him to California for like a couple of months. And he worked here in California and then went back to us, and now he's actually working at BMW, of course. But so we've done for BMW in Munich some wheels then, but we've done quite a few other projects where we helped to surface some of their show cars. Interesting project as well, Embraer, a private jet. This project came through the Paris office. No, it came through the California office of our company, through the Paris office, from Florida to us in China. So we've done the design. Again, our Chinese talent did all the design, the thoughts, to the concepts for this jet, because at that time the thought was that the government will open up the private jet market in China. There was the expectation, which unfortunately hasn't happened yet, but they wanted to bring in now and introduce a design for their private jets that did not adhere only to the Middle Eastern guys or the American guys or whoever normally buys that type of jets. So there's no design yet that really reflects what China needs. For example, like cooking the hot water, doing some rice, having some fresh utilities. So there's a lot of other needs that a Chinese customer has in a private jet that are currently not met. So in this case, we wanted to meet all of that from the colors, but also really from the organization within that cabinet. There's a lot of thought in that cabinet that you, of course, don't see here right now in those images. So the images were rendered at the studio in Paris. So excellent visualizations, what they were able to pull off. That's it about the projects. Now a little bit day and night, because of course we've kind of talked mostly about the work site, kind of the building up. I showed you some of the projects. I talked in the beginning a little bit about the principles. There's a lot more stories. When we were earlier, we talked about some of those stories. There's some experiences which are really fun. There's some experience I've had that I did never wanted to have, of course. So maybe later, if you have any questions, you can ask like some more stuff. But now I wanted to go a little bit more on the fun stuff here, like living. Like, what does it actually mean to live in China? What's kind of the cultural differences? What is there? Yeah. What we see often is on the right-hand side, the pollution. Yes, it's real. I lived it. Especially when I was now recently in Chongqing over the winter, we had a pollution of 260 or something like that, micro something, whatever that is. But I don't care really what it means. You feel it on your tongue, your eyes hurt. Yeah, it's like we had to drive out to the factory quite a bit. And this drive was literally horrible. I was like getting sick. I was not healthy anymore at that time. So that's why I needed to kind of leave there as well, because just it was like it's like being at the end of the world. It's like it looks like when it burns here in California, yeah, and you have this orange, dirty, brownish air. Yeah, that's what it is there on a daily basis and for like a couple of months in Chongqing. So it was pretty horrible. But you have, of course, also the blue sky. Sometimes it's they have special names for the blue sky because it happens especially also in political events. The G20 blue sky and something like that, yeah, which is very funny. So suddenly Beijing can have the most beautiful sky for a couple of days, same with Shanghai. But some days you cannot even see. I mean, we had a week, I think, around Christmas in Shanghai, where we could not see the neighbor's house from our house, which is from here to there or something like that. So you couldn't see that far because of fog. So London fog, yeah? Remember London fog? Now I know what London fog means. This is London fog. London fog is not a nice little fog, that's London fog. So that's what we experience here. Then of course you have the city, you have crazy city, and I'll get into that, but you have also the interest on the nature, which is on the one hand on the city. So this on the left side is a photo from our compound when sometimes the trees really bloomed up. The compound was very green, was very taken care of. You see in the cities, they plant, I mean, it looks, they have a competition, I believe, between the cities who can have the most beautiful city. And of course, every city wants to be the most beautiful city because Shanghai doesn't want Chongqing to win it, yeah, because it's a pride thing. So everybody's working, you see always people working on the street to put flowers in, to maintain the flower beds, to put trees in, to maintain the trees and so on and so forth. So when you come here to LA, you think like, nobody gives a shit here. Yeah, there people really, they start to care. And it's kind of really nice to see, yeah, you care. Even you see really a lot of dirty stuff there, but it's all slowly being cleaned up because they start to care more and more about the environment. It's part of this change of society that it's not just for me, how rich can I get, but like how do I actually create something that is okay to live in, that is good to live in. The pollution is so heavy that they need to do the electric vehicles, yeah. So there's certain policies they have to do now. There's certain things that they want to do though. This I think harks back a little bit to the Cultural Revolution where they had to pull all the plants out, where all the flowers had to be pulled out because Mao said, this is bourgeois and we need to kill it all because we need to have a new society, yeah. So now the society can revive, it can replenish, it slowly gets there. So it's very much for the soul. So the soul is getting nurtured. On the right side, that's an image out in Sichuan Mountain. It's World Heritage. It's up in about 4,000 meters high. I've showed you earlier the image with the green, crazy winding road. Most amazing trip that I've done. Street. You see sometimes very strong colors. I love these pictures, these images. In China, you love street food. Yeah, if you go to Taiwan, it's even more. Yeah, like street food, yay! Yeah, because it's the most tasty stuff, of course, you can get. Barbecue, yeah. So in the summer in Shanghai as well, all those little barbecues come out. The guys at night have barbecue. People love to snack. They go out at night, they dance, they party, they drink, and then they, of course, at 2 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock at night, they need some snacks. Yeah, so they are like those little guys that open up at night to have snacks with barbecue and whatever. For it. On the other side, fruits, juices, teas, yeah, fresh, yeah, or cut up fruit. I mean, she's really cutting up the fruit. So there's a little bit of discussion probably about the food. You have a lot of contamination on the food, so certain things are very questionable how food is produced in China, of course. But there's also a lot of emphasis on the freshness of the food. Yeah, you go into the restaurant, and the best is probably the farm restaurants they have. Yeah, it's literally a little bit outside of Shanghai. There's a couple of restaurants. They have farm restaurants. You go in, they have their chicken, they have their fields with the vegetables, they have their ponds, and you say like, okay, I wanted to have this. So they take the chicken, they take the pond, go into the pond, they fish it out, you get the freshest food there. It's unbelievable, yeah? Or you go into restaurants, you say, this fish, this turtle, or this frog, or whatever I want to eat, yeah? And then you get that made for you, yeah? Or they bring out sometimes in a little bucket the fish, you're like, yeah, okay, I take that fish, yeah? It's like bringing the wine bottle out, and then you get the fish made. Fresh, nice. Perfect, yeah? So this is like kind of a very different. Here in the States, the food comes in white buckets, yeah, in the morning. Yeah, and then the only thing the chef does here, opens the thing out, boops, blop, blop, and then, okay, microwave bling, and you get it, that's why you get it here in 5 minutes, yeah? So the food doesn't sit here. So there you get, actually you see the guys in the morning with a little mofa, and then they have the pig on the back and all the vegetables and everything, yeah, so half a pig, the vegetables, and then they cut it all up in the restaurant. Or they have it like right there, you order something, so the cook is like, oh, okay, here's my cucumbers and here's my other stuff, tuck, 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 yeah, they cut it all up, schwupp, put it in the thing, and you get it. I was like, that's what you eat. You eat actually vegetables. You don't eat processed food like what you do here. So you really, it's a very, very different mindset. So yes, sometimes questionable how they grow it, but you eat actually fresh, not like here. So most restaurants, you don't eat fresh here. You only eat bucket food. So food, super important there. Another thing, art. Yeah, art, I mentioned that earlier as well. There's a very big interest now from young people to study design, art-related things, creative things, whatever, writing, and so on and so forth. Just like some of the photos from some of the exhibitions I went to, some stuff is very, very strange. I think this is from Chongqing at the art school. I went there at the design school. Interesting sculpture. This is also Chongqing. Then very traditional kind of sculpture, and this weird guy out of Shanghai and some of the art things. So they have this very strange art places everywhere, yeah, where like artists doing crazy exhibitions, and then of course they have a bit more professional art exhibits, and it's a lot. What you see is a lot of sculpture art, yeah. So very, very interesting things. Sometimes I don't really know what I'm looking for, but sometimes, yeah, when you look at that, it's like, is it, yeah, when you see some broken things that are puzzled, things that need to be put together, things where you kind of smile, even you can cry. Yeah, so there's something that is getting expressed there from the local artists. Yeah, those plastic bags that are hanging there with like just some fluid inside. What are they doing? Yeah, the guy standing in the ice. Yeah, and talking. So a lot of very, very interesting different types of art, but very vibrant art culture there. Then of course I mentioned transportation. Transportation infrastructure, one of the backbones to move a society forward. How do you get 250 million families into the middle class? It's by the government pushing infrastructure. You have the most modern airports in China. You have the most modern train. The largest high-speed rail train system is in China. China is now the largest manufacturer for high-speed rail. They will now manufacture airplanes. So it's just astonishing. There's a train station that has, I think, 20 train tracks next to each other or something like that. Very punctual, very fast. They go about 300 kilometers per hour or something like that. Yeah, so they now have a new track between Shanghai and Beijing. So then you can think about, okay, do I take the train or do I take the airplane? Yeah? So they've built in the last 10 years as well a network here that is mind-boggling. When I was here, we've talked about the high-speed rail between Los Angeles and San Francisco. I'm like, let's see, maybe in 10 years we have something, I don't know. Yeah? In China it's already done. Yeah, they finished it. The same when you think about then the metro system. Shanghai, they have 16 lines. 16 lines. Shanghai is like almost the size around Los Angeles. And they put 16 lines down. They dig the tunnels. Yeah. Now here it's like, oh, Elon Musk has a boring company and they bore like 100 meters or something. That's like, okay, who cares? Like they're doing thousands of kilometers like in that time. Yeah? So they've like a huge infrastructure from a national perspective and from a city's perspective. And what's also now, it's the innovation that comes out. So Mobike is probably pretty known here now. Now you have here the skates, which is now a big discussion, I think, in the various beach towns. They're all modeled after Mobike. Yeah? So it's not that the Western side that China is modeling after the Western side. Now China's starting to lead more and more in innovations, where then the Western side is coming in and kind of looking, okay, how do we do that? So Mobike now is getting into Europe as well. They're going into others. So I rode a Mobike already in Turin and in Milan. Yeah, so they are in Sweden. So they're kind of spreading around. So what's the genius about it? Now you have Didi, which is the Uber in China. You can, from your home, you really don't need a car anymore. You can take a Didi. You can take the Mobike very quickly, very easily, and you can ride the train. So private ownership, of course, you still have the scooters around and so, because it's fun, but it gets less and less because you don't need it so much anymore. You have more the shared bike. But again, part of this as well, it's kind of the contrast. Yeah? When you see on the left side, old Shanghai quarter, people love to put their laundry outside because it gets sterilized by the sun. So that's why they do it. It's very important there. So they hang it always out. So it's kind of fun. The Shanghai flags, it's called. And then on the other hand, you have those shopping temples. Yeah? Like this is the IPM mall in Shanghai, very modern mall. I mean, pristine, clean to the last dot. And you don't have just one. You have, 100 of them in Shanghai. Yeah, because you have 24 million people probably living in Shanghai, about 24 million people. In Chongqing, which I mentioned, that most people never heard of, they have, I think, about 30 million people. So when you think about like, okay, America is a little bit bigger in Europe terms, 24 million people. So Greece, a country of Greece, has 4 million people. Sweden has 6 million or something like that. Yeah? So you have to take a couple of European countries and put them into the size of Shanghai. Yeah? So when you think sometimes about like if Greece has its own military and it did the Olympics, of course they're bankrupt. Yeah, so it's like if Pudong in Shanghai, which it's a part of Shanghai, does the Olympics and has its own military, it doesn't make sense. Yeah? So it's kind of fun when you sometimes put those things into a little unrational perspective. Nightlife. Okay, I mean, I do definitely love, that's why I fell in love with Shanghai. The first time I visited Shanghai was doing the World Expo in Shanghai, and I was standing on the Puxi side. The Puxi side is on the old side of the Huangpu River, and then you look on the Pudong side. So this is Pudong. Pudong is kind of the financial center, and from there you go to the bigger airport. But so you look at the Pudong side and you see those crazy buildings on the other side with humongous advertisements running up and down the building. So the whole buildings are lit up. So I'm like, this is completely nuts. I want to be here. I want to kind of experience what it is. So this is one of the views at night from now the second tallest building in the world, which is the Shanghai Financial Tower, which is that one on the left. So it's like you have sometimes a dramatic view after a big rainstorm. It was kind of hot, and then the steam comes up, the lights go on. It's like Blade Runner. Yeah, it's like Blade Runner on steroids. It's completely crazy. I remember that some guys from Germany, they flew over. They have a studio in Beijing actually, but they kind of visited us. And then we had a big storm, and then we took them on the Yan'an elevated road. Yeah, so a lot of roads are at about the 5th level of the street. So think of Jules Verne. Yeah, so Jules Verne is their reality. So we drive there on the Yan'an Lo. Yeah, we kind of have our what did I have? Like our van, yeah, with the driver in the front, the guy sitting there in the front, and you kind of see the fogs coming up. It's dark. You see all those buildings left and right, and you kind of drive for half an hour easily, and it's never ending of large, crazy buildings. And you go to the Bund, and we went then to eat. It's like the most mind-boggling kind of view and experience you can have if you come from a small town in Germany, especially. Yeah, from LA, it's a little bit different. Coming from a small town in Germany, you're like, wow, this is complete crazy. It's like, I mean, there you can imagine flying cars. It's like nothing short of that. Fun part as well, of course, again, always the street vendors. I showed you a little bit before. You have the meat outside. You kind of cut up the, I don't want to say it, the dogs or something like that, and you hang it up to dry it. That's true. So all the fruits and so on and so forth, you can buy it, you can eat it there. And then, okay, now you get to the crazy lawais. Lawai, that's like the fauna in China. And so one of those nights, I went out and was by myself. Went to one of those streets where the lawais like to go. And then, it's like I meet a friend, actually a former student of mine who works in China. He's there, so we're having some beers. Then some girls from Denmark, and some other guys from Germany, and some other guys. So suddenly we are kind of a group of people who are drinking together, and they're like, oh, let's go somewhere else. So how do we get there? So they hop, and we all hop into those fun little scooters, those little tuk-tuks. And because there were only 3 tuk-tuks, we all had to jump into those tuk-tuks to go to the next crazy place. So the next crazy place was this one then, one of the bars which they kind of light up then the bar. So you have a lot of like nightlife there as well. You have a lot of fun. And Shanghai really becomes a melting pot. You have a large population of foreigners that come from wherever. Yes? If it's from Australia, from Germany, from America, from Italy, from Australia, from Japan. You have Chinese that are coming back that were living abroad and so forth. So it's this crazy big melting pot there now. Yeah, everybody works hard. China, and especially Shanghai, is a very intense city. Very, 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 very intense. Very strong. Very pushing. I mean, a year feels like 3 months there. So yeah, it's completely nuts. So it's intense as well. So at night sometimes getting kind of fun and intense too. So you have that. You have great live music. I loved always to go to the live music. So that's a Jay-Z club, which got closed. They opened another one. So they had always great bands there. Lots of different clubs and venues where you can go for live music. Little different is like Chongqing, yeah. Of course, like that photo, I love that. I always love kind of funny, sometimes Japanese and Western comic kind of stuff. This is a club very different in Chongqing. where the feeling is more Chinese club. Yeah, so Chinese clubs are kind of did a little bit different than the Western clubs. There you kind of go in, you have to be in a group, and you do drinking games in order to be allowed to drink. So normally they get the big flask then with some small glasses, and then you have to do the games, and then you drink, and then you get drunk through very quickly. Huh? So I mean, and big entertainment. So there you always like in those clubs, then they need entertainment. They need to be kind of like we had some other stuff where Westerners came in as an artist, and they did some crazy stuff there as well. So very lively. But the other side also is from the companies, from Chinese companies. I was working there then as well for half a year for Chinese engineering and design company in Chongqing. Had a lot of fun, great talented team there. But they love to go out and drink. So you have to go out with a team and you drink, and then me as a Westerner, of course, everybody has to drink with me because they have to test me how much I can drink. Yeah, so yeah. And then and then the food is completely spicy. Yeah? So I'm like, I can't eat that spicy. It's like Chongqing spice. Yeah, I mean Chongqing food is its own thing. It's spicy as hell, and they have the Chongqing pepper, and I really can't do the Chongqing pepper. They love the hot pot as well, so I avoided the hot pot, I have to admit. But of course, it's great food. Yeah, it's like, I mean, you try the craziest stuff, but yeah. So we went quite a bit of out to drink and party. Yeah, so here you kind of see sometimes how decadent the food can be. Yeah? You have the freshest lobsters, you have some other fresh things all on ice for the hot pot things here. I mean, super decadent on the one side, but like for the lunch, yeah, so that's like the daily lunch. Like next to the factory, you have the little plastic chairs, so all the different restaurants pull it out. But there, it's like really like you go in, then they know you a little bit, the lady that cooks. Yeah, they know you kind of order some stuff, whatever you want to, and then she grabs down into the buckets all the different ingredients, cuts it up, and then you eat it. Yeah, so it's you eat fresh stuff in that little place. Another thing what you can really eat fresh is, okay, for people that are, so we have to do this a little bit. When we went up to the mountains there, into the Tibet region, they have yak. Yeah, yak are those really kind of little kind of big cows, and they love barbecue. So what they do is they just get the yak wherever they need it, they cut it open, skin it, pull all the things out, and they make the best barbecue ever. Had the best barbecue there, really spicy as well, but that was in 4,100 and something meters high. Yeah, so I mean, like you're really high up there from an altitude. And like the earlier picture I showed you, this winding road that went to that point. Wonderful. Then kind of team gathering here, where they have this fire coal grill where we did, I think. There were goats or sheep or something like that where they grilled. So in each table got one of these things, and we kind of like ate it there. First you eat the meat, and then you move to the other table where all the vegetables and the soups are. So I'm sorry, I talk a lot. You like really don't like it. My son is vegan, yeah, so I'm. He probably cries. But it's part of when you see that before. It has a certain groundedness. If you are removed from it with bucket food, you're very removed from, I don't know, from reality, from earth, from the ground, from the earth, yeah? So there you have that. So on the one hand, you have this crazy party, or you have those crazy malls, yeah? But you have as well this very grounded family getting together with fresh food and so it's very interesting, the contrast. The other contrast is they have their car culture. Yeah, they love those Jeeps. You see them quite frequently, occasionally, where guys modifying like crazy their Jeeps or any other cars. Pink again, yeah, you have a lot of pink stuff as well. It's a cool color. Just China, Amy. I do my spelling mistakes as well, but there you see it on T-shirts and on cars, which is very funny sometimes. Another, I love that, the contrast. Chinese love the Ford F-150. I think Ford cannot get enough over there. Problem is, it's a truck. And the truck has to have its license plate painted on it, unfortunately. So he was registered as a truck. So he has a $200,000 car or something, whatever he paid for it, and he just had to put all the truck thing on it, like all the other hauling trucks have. Well, in contrast, of course, a little trike I thought is kind of sweet. Both kind of modified and kind of probably were very proud of their cars. Same with this one, yeah. What I think is very funny, the color combo is like, I mean, when I looked for the photos, I was like, oh, this is very similar. I should put those two together, yeah. So both proud owners. One, of course, unfortunately in Chongqing, riding through the bad air at that moment. But the top, the fit, the bottom fits. Well, this one, of course, is a chrome foil. And we love chrome foils if they come in like light blue and pink or any other fantastic colors. Yeah, you see a lot of those Porsches, Ferraris, McLarens, and so on. So for all the supercars seem to kind of live in, especially in Shanghai or Beijing, of course, driven by young people. We just discussed it today as well. 25% of Ferrari owners in China are female, while Ferrari normally in any other country of the world is basically 99.9% owned by men. Yeah? So in China it's very different. Coupes, sports cars like Porsche, 911s, Boxsters, Z4 and so on and so forth. Women drive those cars. Like a Ferrari and so on and so forth. So normally women drive cars like that for certain reasons. Anyway, so I'm coming to a conclusion finally, just with some other fun things like on the flea market on the one side, it's kind of the little Mao figures, and then we're ending with the little waving cat figures. So with that, thank you for staying to the end. I think I went through a lot of stuff, and I don't know whoever recognizes that sign up there. That's the company I'm working for right now, which is Pininfarina. Thank you. What I showed is a clay model. A clay model is the usual sculpture that has been used in the automotive industry since GM started to use it in the 1930s. So literally it's a sculpture. So it's something that you go in with tools and you change whatever you want to because it's a soft material. Clay, industrial clay, has been put in an oven to make it warm. Then you apply it to a base, which is often a foam base. I showed you a foam vehicle. And then in today's world, because you work it in first digital, in Alias in our case mostly, or Maya or any other program, then you mill it. And after the milling, you normally still do clay work by a clay modeler because you change anything and everything what you want. So it's like an artist. So we have sculptors that are the artists that make it as beautiful as possible. That's also for the engineers to look at. So then the engineers come in and scrutinize, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and you have to raise the hood now for 10 mils and yada, yada, yada. And so you kind of, that thing is a moving sculpture. It moves every day. No. It's actually more frequent now that you do late changes. With just the last experience, I didn't show you anything of that. Developing a exterior and interior as well, and we've reviewed then the a hard model of that design, and the hard model company actually didn't do a good job. So the car looked a little bit like a banana. So we're like, holy crap. So we had to rescan it, check it, found out that they've done not a good job in the whole thing. But that led to a decision that I wanted to do earlier, where I had to fight with a designer that was a responsible guy before to make a big change. So yes, I've done, while we were in A-class surfacing. So A-class surfacing in automotive is the stage when all the engineering gets finalized in order to be able to produce the car and to cut tools. So I've done a change of like lowering the whole hood by, I think it was in 10 mils, and that's huge. Yeah, when you kind of like a 10 mil move in that point, when you're in A-class surfacing, and the release was about 3 days later, it's quite a big move, yes. Well, no, we didn't. If you cut the tools, there's basically no change anymore. But we've done a lot of projects where in China they've cut the tools, but the boss didn't like it at the end, so he wanted to have a new design. So then we did new design after they cut the tools already. So in a state-owned company, you can do that because nobody is really responsible. In a company that needs to make money, you cannot do that because cutting a tool is very expensive. The big thing in the automotive industry is like when you see like your whole exterior is stamped out of sheet metal, plus the whole structure, the floor, the sides, the B surface. It's very, very complex structure. You have a B surface, you have a surface, and then normally you kind of spot welded together where the doors is. Here, when you open the door, you pull out your rubber seal, then you see the spot welds where the two parts are melded together. So these have to be stamped in very large stamping things. So certain companies can do a certain complexity in their stamping, and certain companies cannot do. So those tools have to be cut. They're very, very expensive, especially also if you do the tools for the big plastic parts, the bumpers that are plastic parts, so the injection molded parts then, and so on and so forth. So if you go into that, this is rolling. So there were some companies, sometimes Opel, part of in the past from GM now, PSA, they developed a successor to a vehicle, like it was an Omega, and everything was finished. It was just before going into tooling, and then they did a final check from the top management, and they're like, X that project right before the tooling, because that's when they said like, okay, can we really successfully bring this car to market and make the money after we invested? So development time is a certain amount, but if you go into tooling, put it into the factory, that's where a lot of money suddenly is spent. So the VR system is, we are using VRED. That's part of the Autodesk. So Autodesk has Maya, alias VRED. What you have to do then for the interior, you put your glasses on. The glasses have reference points, and this reference point then has to be calibrated to your position within the seating buck. I'm not getting. So when you sit inside, then you have to hold your steering wheel, and somebody has to adjust your viewpoint exactly to that same position, that when you see it virtually, that you feel it the same way. So from your depths and everything, you can set it up. So with the last company as well, with the company that I was there, we had such sophisticated VR and mixed reality, basically buck, where we were able to go into a buck, moved the seat forward and backward, and in virtual reality the seat was moving forward backward. We were able to move the wheel up and down, forward and backward as well, in order to kind of see what physically happened in the VR side. So from that you were able to change, of course, all the views and change a lot of things. So we were grabbing virtually a what's it called, like a menu. So you grabbed the menu virtually, and then you were able to tip certain buttons basically in order to get different topics, like different color and trims or different environments or something like that. And then you were able to get out of the car and see the car from the outside. So you were able to walk around the car as well. Does it answer that? Is that the question? Okay. Of course, there are certain cultural barriers, but it depends who you talk to. That's, of course, that's a very, very interesting and pertinent question, the cultural side. When you are talking to young people, which are much more open and more curious, there's way less barrier because they at the end have the same, everybody has the same goals, hopes and dreams in the world, which are not too different from each other. But when you sometimes you talk to older people there that in government companies that are maybe, let's say they have other goals and opinions, then it's much harder to talk to them. You know? There's, like, I mean, in the Western side, we've talked about at some point many years ago, the divide between the generations. And you have a very strong divide between generations, probably in China, from the old generation and the new generation. Very, very different. Language barrier, of course, there's a language barrier. Some colleagues of mine that speak Chinese, read Chinese, write Chinese, but that are Westerner. I had one colleague in particular, he got very mad sometimes that the Chinese colleagues was not translating correctly what was said. Because sometimes it's like that then the person who translates doesn't want to hurt somebody's feeling. Yeah? So when I was saying something, he probably was translating. So sometimes you can use it in order to make the communication a little easier. Yeah, but sometimes it's not so good if you get a wrong impression then what actually happens. And sometimes what's funny, actually, we've been in meetings where, because we were a supplier, so I went with my colleague, and they did not know he understands everything. And they were talking about us, and they were making joke about us, how stupid we are, that we think that to develop a car takes 3 years, yeah, and they can develop a car supposedly in 1 year, yeah. And he's like, I mean, he told me he translated everything at the same time, so we just kept calm. They thought they were joking on us. So yeah, I mean, sometimes fun stuff is happening. 9. I'm doing more extra stuff. No, my role was more to give them direction for the conceptual side, giving them the framework. What I think you came a little later. Giving them the framework of the whole project, so that the designers can run the project. What I came in is like, okay, we're looking at all those designs, but what does it actually mean? Like, is it just meaningless sketches that we're all doing, or now can we find a theme? Can we find a concept? So then I was like, okay, these are the concepts. This is kind of the thoughts we need to go and to work. And then the designers were taking that over and over, and I didn't even do the concept, and they were starting to do the concepts, because we had fantastic guys. Yeah? Really enjoyed working with the team there. Yeah, that's a good question. China now sells per year 26 million cars. I think it's plateauing off right now. The market changes suddenly again. I think ownership will stay around in any country. China still can add more cars because they still have less cars per family than like the States, for example. If you're in the inner city, maybe it loses a bit of attractiveness overall by young people, because you can use the DD and stuff like that. But as soon as you have a family like here, how do you really live without a car? Because you need to transport them around, the kids with the diapers, with all the kind of stuff. So then life is suddenly a little bit different. What will be more the case there is, of course, the electric cars. I mean, they have such a high high number of electric and hybrid vehicles running around already from Chinese companies that all have plug-in hybrids driving around. That now goes to the potentially autonomous vehicle. That's where they're very, very interested into. It will be very difficult to implement that. But I think that changes maybe more, and that might change away from needing personally to own it, but they will still be around. Yeah, it has always a big effect. That always depends with the team you're working with. So with the last company, it's a good example. We had 2 projects running pretty much at the same time, 2 exterior and interior projects, 2 brands with 2 different engineering and 2 different project management teams. The one project really went really well and successful because the engineers and the project managers at that team were very, very understanding to try to make the best product possible. They saw this as a chance, as well, me being there to help them, to guide them, to create a very strong product. And I think we were all very, very happy to create that. We had some issues where they took certain decisions, which I found out later, and I really, really was angry about it and blasted that and made them go back to where the design was, because I said, you cannot, from an engineering side, change a design. And that's what an engineer did actually in the A-class surfacing, that he said, due to quality reasons for this particular point, we need to do all those changes. So suddenly he changed, from a designer's perspective, this whole car. Suddenly it was broken. I was like, why is it happening? Yeah, so I had it a couple of times. So when I caught it, I was able to discuss with them and push them back. The other team had a bit more of a harder time because the product manager wasn't so supportive, I think, of pushing the design. The leadership behind that project as well in that company wasn't really supportive of the design. They destroyed it at some point. They made certain decisions that actually I was gone for 2 weeks, and they did cut basically the car and made the proportions awful. And then since then the car was broken, and then they said like, oh, your front end is not good. So then another design company had to go in to redo the front end, but it still was shit. Yeah, so it's like, you guys broke it when I told you what to do in order to do certain changes you wanted in order to get to that point, but it couldn't be the way you did it. You did it, and it's like the whole thing was broken, and they couldn't never fix it anymore. And it was done. Yeah, so the project got on ice. How I moved around, or? In Shanghai, my favorite one, taking the motorbike. I don't know. Yes, I mean, in Shanghai, originally I was always, at that time living further out, had a driver driving us around. I never really enjoyed that so much. I enjoyed actually more taking the metro, taking the motorbike, DD if possible. So that's... I mean, but that all changed as well radically with the arrival of DD and those things, yeah. So how I moved around, because a lot of things changed. I mean, like one thing I have actually not mentioned is fun. Here you pay things by cash, and you even use checks and things like that. So. It's like a little ancient. In China, you only use your cell phone. It's like in Japan, I've used it for a long time. So I have WeChat, of course, WeChat. I don't know, who has WeChat? Okay, a couple of at least, yeah. So, I mean, you show WeChat in comparison to WhatsApp. Yeah, so you don't know why you have a WhatsApp if you know what WeChat can do and like how you use it. It's a complete different game there. And you have Alipay, so you pay with those methods. I mean, huh?
We have Visa and MasterCard to keep us from innovating.
Maybe. That might be, yes. But I mean, like of course, with these things, there come of course other things. So, yeah, China uses, no, the Chinese government now uses the new electronic methods to have complete control over you. Yeah, Chinese people are very individualistic. They want to do their own thing. They don't care about the government. They care about that they have a good life like anybody else, basically. But the Chinese government, for some reason, is very worried. I don't know why they're worried, because nobody wants to have a revolution, because it's a good system. It works. It brings people into the middle class. They make money. That's good. But the Chinese government is very kind of nervous and anxious that something would not work anymore. So now they're putting in a point system for people, how you act socially. So they monitor everything, whatever you write in WeChat, whatever you do, how you do it. If you go over the red light, they have very advanced face recognition technology. The other day, there was a concert, 40,000 people went to that concert. The police has face recognition. There was a guy who was on a search warrant. They saw that that guy came in, the police went in, they pulled him out of the stadium. They are in every metro station that you go, is face recognition. The police is there with their glasses on nowadays. The glasses identify if the ID card that you show, every Chinese has an ID card, and if that face actually matches this, in a moment's notice now. So they have a very, very advanced technology to control, of course, the behavior of a whole society not to get out of line. Because if you are like having bad comments, you doing bad things, you crossing the red line or whatever, yeah. So your social points, you start with like 800 points or something like that, whatever the point number is, and then your point number decreases. So if it decreases to a certain point, you suddenly can't buy a train ticket, or you can't buy an airplane ticket. You definitely don't get a house, yeah. So because you can't get a credit anymore. So you definitely have to show that you're a good citizen, yeah. But don't kid yourself. Facebook, Google, they want to do the same thing. They're already talking about that here too. The same kind of thing, that you kind of control the society in the same way. So they were talks, I mean, that came out the other day. Google had here as well very, very intense records from MasterCard in order to understand your financial behavior. They wanted to go into the social behavior. They talked already to credit rating companies. How do you rate the credit in order to show that? So monitoring as well the social behavior is in their talks, in their thoughts. So China's just ahead of the curve in that case. So they're doing that already. That will come here too, probably, in a possibility. So interesting. So you are using all those new technologies freely, but you have to know, everybody knows what you're doing as well. It's like Facebook, no? It's like so, wow, okay, wow, that was like a little, went a little bit to the side there. But but that's the thing. It's like in China, we discussed it earlier. Everything has two sides. Yeah, something is good, but it's also bad. Yeah, so my salesperson at some point, like he told me, it's like, oh, that's really bad, but it's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good that it's bad. But it's like, if it's good, maybe that's kind of bad. So it's very strange. Certain things contradict themselves in China. You can do the one thing, but it can mean the other thing at the same time. It's very difficult for me to explain that. If you've lived in China or are Chinese, you've been on the outside, you went there, you kind of understand it a little bit, like what I'm probably talking about. All right, any other questions? Okay, I mean, I studied in Hannover, Germany, industrial design. I was always interested into cars, so I was then able to get into an internship at Mercedes-Benz in Stuttgart. First I did actually an industrial internship where I spent a half a year just in the factory, going around and looking on all the production methods and everything there, which was super interesting because from there I really understood how you put a car together, how that all works with all those different parts and pieces. And there I was able to get into contact there with the guys that do about the internship. And so I was able to talk to somebody there in the design department. And then I was able to do an internship there. We've done my first kind of car project there. Then I've done a car project in school. And then I did also my thesis work there. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Henning.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, guys.